Welcome to our Voices of Parkinson's series. Today's guest is outstanding and one of my favorites. Sara Riggare is one of the brightest emerging stars in Parkinson's disease research. She's employed at Uppsala University in Sweden and is also a doctoral student at Radboud University in the Netherlands. If that sounds familiar, that's because Dr. Bas Bloem, our senior author on the book, is a professor there. Sara has already published 20 papers in the leading medical journals in the world, including the British Medical Journal, Lancet Neurology and Neurology. She's also serves on an advisory panel at the British Medical Journal. In her research, she has highlighted that over a year, doctors only see patients for 1 hour out of a patient's nearly 9,000 hours with Parkinson's disease. Thus, doctors like me are prone to miss a thing or two. She's developing digital health and other solutions to address this large gap. Just last year, Focus magazine, the Swedish equivalent of Time magazine, named her the Swede of the Year in medicine. A chemical engineer by training, Sara is also a proud mother, a boxer, and a social media maven. Many of you are probably joining because of her posting. Oh, and I almost forgot to say that Sara actually has Parkinson's disease. Sara, welcome.
Thank you, Ray. I'm happy to be here.
So your Parkinson's journey is a little bit complicated. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, it's probably a bit unusual. I had my first symptoms at age 13. And at that time, I wasn't diagnosed with Parkinson's. I wasn't diagnosed with Parkinson's until I was 32 and the mother of a 4-month-old baby. I had a different diagnosis meanwhile, which actually turned out to be for the best in my case. If I would have had the Parkinson's diagnosis in my teens, I think there's a lot of things I wouldn't have been doing now. I think there's a lot of things that I would have given up on doing because I didn't think I wouldn't have thought that they were possible. But now, since I had done them already for years, I didn't have to stop doing them.
So it's, again, highly unusual for people to develop Parkinson's before the age of 30. And you want to talk a little bit about that first, and then we'll talk a little bit.
So I probably have, with all likelihood, I have a genetic type of Parkinson's disease, but not as genetic as in that sense that it's probably less probable for my now 70-year-old to get this kind of Parkinson's than to get regular Parkinson's. So it's a very rare type of Parkinson's. So yeah, and I'm lucky enough to have a slow progression and very few non-motor symptoms.
And so for just as a review, only about 10 to 15% of cases of Parkinson's are due to identifiable genetic causes. The vast majority we think is due to environmental factors, pesticides, industrial solvents, air pollution alike, and some of them have some interaction, but I think Sara, in your case, is predominantly a genetic disorder.
That's the hypothesis, yes.
What do you learned about Parkinson's disease early? What do you wish you knew about Parkinson's even before you were diagnosed?
I probably wish that the image of Parkinson's disease more generally would have been more updated already then. Because now it's even more inaccurate, this picture of people being in a wheelchair after 5 years, which I'm now 35 plus years in, and I'm not in a wheelchair yet. So these things are so very different, and these things very easily can turn into a self-fulfilling prophecy, I think. If a doctor, an expert, tells someone that that's what you can expect, that's probably what people will see to it that happens as well.
So certainly no self-fulfilling prophecy for you. What do you think that physicians and neurologists should know more about Parkinson's disease?
Yeah, there's plenty. How much time do you have? No, but it's to sum up, I found now when I'm looking at the published research on Parkinson's and my experience of Parkinson's, it's very different. And I wish there were more lived experience accounts within the published research. And I'm of course working to change that, but it's a very slow process.
So there are other individuals who are writers and scientists with Parkinson's disease. John Pepperman, I think we're going to have him on an upcoming talk. And then I forgot the person who just has a new book coming out with Dr. Alberto Este.
Ben Stetcher, yeah.
Yes. So what do we need to do to get more people like you to get more involved in research? Or yeah.
Well, yeah, good question. There's a lot of things that needs to come in place, but it's a very, very difficult path to try and publish lived experience. Just the other week, there was a brief letter published by an Australian neurologist with Parkinson's disease, which is an unusual thing. So I think we need to change on all levels. I mean, including journals, funding agencies, and everything to be more, to bring the lived experience closer together with the academic experience and the clinical experience, not only Parkinson's but across diseases as well. We need a paradigm shift, actually.
We certainly do, and we'll talk a lot more about the things that we need to shift. You noticed that, and I think you even commented in some of your work, that sometimes physicians hinder the efforts of active patients.
Yeah.
Can you give an example?
I can. There's one example that I particularly like from the type 1 diabetes, where a person went into research. She had type 1 diabetes herself. She did research, social sciences research in her own area, among her own peers, and published a study that's titled "What Happens When Patients Know More Than Their Doctors." It's a very well-cited paper from BMJ Open. And in it, she describes how people with type 1 diabetes who have been trained in a special method for regulating their blood sugar are actually hindered by GPs when they come and want and if they have another health issue, the GPs who don't know this method, they actively hinder them. They actually even refuse them their supplies.
Have you seen this in Parkinson's?
I have, in some instances. I'm of course I'm lucky enough, or I probably wouldn't have I would have left my neurologist if he had done something like that. But like the person who gave me my diagnosis, which was a different neurologist, he actually I did not expect when I was 32 and then was to see him on the disease I thought I had, and he actually told me, well, you don't have this dopa responsive dystonia. You have Parkinson's disease. And then he said, have a nice day. I think that shows a bit of the disconnect between the lived experience and the clinical experience in this.
What should physicians and clinicians do instead?
Try and put themselves in our shoes. A couple of years ago, you were involved in an experiment we did with Parkinson's One Day, the empathy exercise. Maybe we can post the link to that YouTube video afterwards, because I won't look for it now, but we can find it. We can send it out to the people who registered, where clinicians and patients were involved in learning from each other, and the experience was to build empathy.
And just Sara, didn't just amplify. So I think Boss Bloom did this too. You gave us gloves, like the gloves that you used to wash dishes. You gave us ankle weights, I think wrist weights. I forgot what else you had us wear. What else did you have us wear?
Some people were told to freeze on unexpected occasions. So they just stop in their tracks and experience that kind of thing as well.
And I think you just had to do it for like a couple hours or something. I remember.
Yeah.
I couldn't type. I hated them. They weren't even made for my size.
No.
That was the point.
Yeah.
It was quite an eye-opening experience, even for someone who's been caring for people for the last 15 years with the disease.
And I think that's a good start. I think we need more of that. But also a webinar such as this, where people can see the world's mix, I think that's also important.
So you've been writing about Parkinson's and blogging for almost 20 years.
Although it's crazy. I'm only 25, right?
And although you're an engineer by training, you decided to go back to school to study health informatics, and soon you'll complete a doctorate, and I'll get to call you Dr. Riggare.
Yeah, I hope so.
Why did you decide to go back to school?
So the main thing was actually that I wanted to be able to talk to researchers in their own in researchers' language. I sort of had the insight that to be able to be taken seriously by researchers, you need to be a researcher yourself. And then I said to my husband, "Too bad I'm not." And he said, "But why? You can become one." I was like, "No, surely not." But then I thought, maybe I can. So then I figured, being in engineering, I figured, okay, I need to learn the world of medicine. And since we live in Stockholm, Karolinska Institute was close at hand to think about. And by chance, I found this program in health informatics that I then applied to and started studying in 2010. And then became a doctoral student a few years after that.
We're going to let people ask you a lot of questions in the Q&A. So people,
Sure.
listeners, please start putting your questions in there. You've led efforts for people with Parkinson's to track their own health because you think that's completely been overlooked a lot by clinicians. What have you learned from these efforts?
I've learned that I myself had the wrong idea to begin with. Originally, I figured that if I can just let people do what I have been doing for myself and find out how my medications work and what the variations over the course of the day is, and then be able to change it themselves, things will be pushed forward. But then suddenly I realized that, well, if people can find out what they need to change in their medication or have an idea of what they should be trying, but it still takes them 6 months to get the time with a physician, neurologist to get the prescription they need, that might actually be worse than not knowing at all. So I shifted my focus in this. So now my focus is to find ways of facilitating the encounter, the doctor visit with collected information and data observations beforehand for a few days and maybe a week to have more information for the visit. And of course, working within the medical system is so much slower than working in the real world. But I'm getting there, I think, slowly but steadily.
On that note, Joy Milne asks us, does the male medical model for Parkinson's disease work for the woman?
That is an interesting question, Joy. I'm not entirely sure what you mean by the male model of Parkinson's disease. I do know there are some differences, and as being a woman, premenopausal woman, I know that there are a lot of interactions between our hormonal cycles and Parkinson's symptoms and medication that most neurologists aren't even aware of or even interested in talking about. So that's one thing that doesn't work. And of course, medication dosages is of course as well adapted for male subjects mostly. So there definitely are issues that are different. And also, of course, there is some evidence suggesting that estrogen is a protective agent for Parkinson's disease, which then would affect as well during menopause, I guess.
We might come back to that and see if Joy wants to amplify on that.
Yeah.
What research has you most excited?
Research that pushes the boundaries research that makes a difference today for people with Parkinson's disease. One thing that I've been trying to get going for years, and I haven't given up yet, is to have. That's what we involved also in my doctoral work myself, but to develop models for working clinicians and people with Parkinson's together to optimize the current treatment with currently available treatments, combinations and timings. Because of course, timing of medication is almost as important as dosages, or even more important maybe.
So what are we missing in terms of the timing? Where are doctors missing in terms of timing?
You're not seeing us 24/7. That's the thing, and we might not be able to. We don't have the tools currently, or the support to be able to take that responsibility ourselves completely. I mean, if I sometimes say that I have diabetes envy, and that might sound very strange, but in diabetes they have the biomarkers that we don't have. they have a biomarker both for current sort of status as well as long term. And we have nothing. So they have something to, being an engineer, I like, of course, sort of these kind of measures and being able to influence processes. But since we don't have any, and the mindset isn't really ingrained in people and not supported from clinical support perspective either. So we're left to our own in large degree, and I think there's a lot that can be done there.
You spent a lot of time in your research, and even before your research, I think really focusing on digital health applications, especially smartphones for Parkinson's disease. Can you tell us about some of the tools that you've developed and what you found?
Yeah, and that goes back to the insight I had about maybe it's not the best if you have to wait to get the appointment. So that was an app I was part of developing. But now I'm actually trying to go back a bit and of course using digital sort of the abilities that are afforded to us by the digital tools. But I'm trying to see what processes are we trying to look at more. And I actually started using myself quite recently a Fitbit to mostly to track my sleep and my resting heart rate. But also I found it has silent alarms that I can use for medication intakes. So I actually don't have to think as much on when I'm doing medication. Phones are fine, but you don't have them on your person all the time. This actually is very, it frees up cognitive space for me to have this.
So these are portable. What you're wearing is
wearable, yeah.
Is implantable next, and what are your thoughts?
Well, I know people who have implanted chips for different purposes like RFID and stuff. I don't see a clear application for Parkinson specifically, but I'm sure there will be development in that area as well, for sure.
So we have implantable glucose sensors that monitor people's blood glucose, and therefore they can get dosed with insulin through a closed loop pump. Could we see something like that for levodopa?
Not impossible for sure, but the interesting thing is that all the big leaps of development in type 1 diabetes have been made by doctors who are also type 1 diabetics themselves. So I think that's what we need. We need the marrying of the two worlds.
So unfortunately, in our book, there's going to be more and more neurologists who will have developed Parkinson's disease because, Parkinson's disease is the fastest growing brain disease in the world. And indeed, someone like me, my lifetime risk of developing Parkinson's disease with no family history, no known risk factors is 1 in 15.
Yeah.
You just think about there's about 500 Parkinson's specialists in the US and maybe 1,000 or more around the world. That's 30 to 60 people with Parkinson's specialists who are going to have Parkinson's disease.
So we can look forward to great leaps of development then.
Might be a better way.
A glass half full thinking.
Or maybe there's a better way.
Yeah, I think Joy did expand on her thinking a bit here. Let's see.
We got some questions coming in. Before we get to your questions, I'm going to ask you on your website, which is outstanding. You describe yourself as inpatient.
Yeah. So I when I started the website, I think I registered it in 2010 or 2011 something. I didn't like to see myself as a patient. I don't have a problem with that as much these days. I don't have a problem at all actually being referred to as a patient. But so this is of course a play with words. I'm not patient in terms of I don't like sitting waiting around. So that in that sense I'm definitely impatient. And I don't like to wait for other people to solve my problems for me. But if I have a problem, I try to do what I can myself to solve it.
Until COVID struck, the way we cared for people with Parkinson's disease has largely remained unchanged for the last 50 years. The most effective medication for Parkinson's disease is levodopa, and it's been around for 50 years. federal funding in the United States for Parkinson's disease over the last 10 years has remained flat, if not decreased when adjusted for inflation. Are we too complacent in the Parkinson's world?
I'd like to see it as a bigger issue than that. I like to see the medical system as a whole. I actually don't particularly like the comparison between diseases because, of course, we also know that more and more people are getting multi-morbidities, which means that people can have Parkinson's as well as diabetes. And then these two funding bodies then sort of fight for the same pile of cash. So I think we need to look at more of working together and seeing that we want to change the system as a whole, and that takes working together. I think that, in my opinion, actually, Parkinson's research has been too focused on a cure the last decade or so. And I would like to see, as I said earlier, more work also involving helping us to feel well today, or at least tomorrow already.
And so I think the David Finney Foundation, I think, has an explicit mission focused on helping people with Parkinson's disease live better today.
Yeah.
Hearing that we need more research and efforts focused on helping people with the disease currently live better and more full lives.
Yeah, and one of my studies, because people say, well, people with Parkinson's can't access the internet, and they can't do this and that, and they can't make use of the information. One of my studies has done in Sweden, where internet is very much every man's tool. But even the older group of people with Parkinson's in my study, 30% of them had found their information online themselves. So I mean, and this will not decrease. So already today, people with Parkinson's are accessing the internet to finding information themselves. And I think there's a lot to be gained from actually embracing that, instead of, as people in the clinical professions tell people, don't Google, it'll make you worse. But of course, if you Google, there are problems with the internet for sure. But if you help people, teach people how to Google right instead of saying don't Google, so it's a changing world out there.
Yeah, and informed patients, I think there's even evidence informed patients do better in their health than uninformed. Yeah. They have a greater sense of self-efficacy, control over their symptoms, and fare better.
Yeah, and even there's a study saying that self-tracking, even in severe cancer patients, even allow them to live longer with a higher quality of life.
Got some questions. Amy Lindberg asked, how did you know your diagnosis was genetic? Maybe because it came out at an early age, and then what genetic codes or measures were used?
So the genetic test done, we were trying to start a family, and so that's how this came about. And also because early onset is most often genetic, and also having read up on it now, I see that what is said about my genetic type, is Parkin, Park2, it matches all the signs of that subtype. So I'm not 100% sure, but I have that as a hypothesis still, and it seems to work so far.
How did your husband and family react?
So my husband, he's always known that something didn't work as well in my body. He's never been too bothered about that. Because of course, when we met, I already had symptoms since I had my first already when I was 13 or 14. So he's never been too bothered about that. And our 70-year-old, he's never known anything else. So it's pretty chill in my family.
How about your parents?
So my father is not still around. So he actually died when I was 19 in melanoma. I think my mother probably struggles a bit more than my husband does. I guess it's hard to see your own child struggling. I think that's the problem in this.
Well, you certainly made it a lot easier for other people to struggle and battle and live full lives with Parkinson's disease. So thank
you. I'm pleased to hear that. That gives me energy to keep going as well.
Anytime you need a pep talk, I'm happy to help.
Thank you.
I'm a big fan. I'm not as tall as Bob. You got two very
You're
tall
pretty
fans.
close, I would say.
Matt Eagles says, you and I appear to have a Parkinson's disease, slow burning type. How many different subtypes of Parkinson's do you think there are?
To be honest, I don't think we have the right subtype division as of this time. And I'm not sure that it actually is particularly important, because you don't know anyway. I mean, your Parkinson's will not be the only thing you can know for sure is that your Parkinson's will not be the same as the next one's Parkinson's, and you won't know until you sort of try. But I think there are probably a lot of subtypes that we haven't figured out yet. That's my thinking.
Do you have a thought about how we should be subtyping Parkinson's disease at all?
So I'm of the opinion that we haven't found the right model for what Parkinson's disease actually is. I'm sort of leaning towards starting to I see my Parkinson's as a sensory disorder, as a feedback loop disorder. Mine, at least, I can only know my own experience, but I sort of feel that when my feet are too stiff, my gait, of course, becomes worse. And I think we don't have the right model for Parkinson's, so it's difficult to say what we would go about doing. But I think I've been having this thought for a long time, being an engineer, that we can start from the other end, so to say, start from the symptoms and work our way up instead. So take a few people with Parkinson's and just follow them over time in detail and see what emerges.
Howard Beckman asked a question also on this good subtype. A number of speakers have had Parkinson's for many years, beginning under age 40. I think Rich Clifford was diagnosed at age 42, Davis Finney, similar age. Their course seems to go slowly. Is that typical? How about people diagnosed after 70? Is their course really faster?
So I know that previously young onset was seen as a bad thing. I've read the literature from the 60s and 70s. So I think, unfortunately, we just can't know.
I think a lot of people are modifying their course. We can do to modify your course. You want to talk about what you do to modify your course of Parkinson's disease?
Yeah. And on that, I reflected the other day that the Hahn-Jar scale, these stages, they were actually defined in the 1960s. I'm not sure they're so relevant today when we have all the treatments we actually have now. So I think that's one thing we should look at as well. I don't think Hahn-Jar stages are very helpful for people with Parkinson's. But I want to say, Amy, I will link to the video on empathy as well. I know we have another question on that as well. But what I do to modify my course, I definitely stay active. I had a period when I read as much as I could about Parkinson's. I ate, slept, and breathed Parkinson's, which was probably a bit too much for everybody in my vicinity. But the good thing about that is I now have a lot of knowledge. And one of the most important things I've made is to connect with other people with Parkinson's. I've learned so much from others just by connecting and sharing experiences and trying things and trying for others and discuss and that's been absolutely essential for me.
So you mentioned Hone and Yar. So most people in Yar are just some researchers, and who are they? That is Dr. Margaret Hone, or often known as Peggy Hone. She was a professor at Columbia when she wrote the classic paper, the Hone, that became the Hone and Yar scale.
1967.
As you can imagine, in 1967, there weren't many female physicians in the United States, and there weren't many hanging out in neurology departments at Columbia University. I think there weren't many hanging out at Columbia University. The most cited paper in the Parkinson's disease literature is the Hone and Yar paper. I don't know any other area where the most cited paper is first.
It's from 67. Yeah. No, it's
So
very impressive. Yeah.
you can read about Hone and Yar, and you can read about Hone. A lot of the story about Margaret Hone, who sometimes is overlooked in the book. Amy Lindberg asked another question. What are your most annoying Parkinson's symptoms, and what do you take, either prescription or non-prescription?
So my most annoying Parkinson's symptoms, hands down, is my freezing of gait. And freezing of gait is a fascinating experience in so many ways. It's mysterious. It's difficult to manage. It's difficult it's not difficult to predict for me most of the time, but it's a very strange thing. And I've started to describe my freezing of gait. I also think there are different types of freezing of gait, and I don't think we have those down categorized correctly either as of yet. But my type is very much the, what should I call it? The anxiety-driven, the worry-driven freezing of gait. Like if I'm crossing a road and something unexpected happens, I will stop in my tracks. I won't be able to move one millimeter forward, and I describe it as my brain's emergency brake. I actually think that it's related to my scaringly fast reflexes, so that my brain actually acts before I even know it has registered something. And then the other parts of my brain aren't able to cope and keep up. So I used to take a prescription medication for it. What was it called? It was I don't remember it now because I don't take it any longer. But what it did was it made me focus more, because I also think that it's about shifting the brain, making decisions on shifting focus. Now I remember, rivastigmine it's called, rivastigmine. And but what it did was it took away it ate up some of my levodopa, so I had to compensate with more levodopa, and then I became dyskinetic, so it didn't work out well in the end. It did help for a while, but when the levodopa became, it was too difficult to manage without dyskinesia. But so what I do now is actually, when I walk out in the city in Stockholm and even other places as well, I use a mobility aid, a rollator, and it makes me much more relaxed when walking. It makes me walk more upright. It makes me be able to walk much further, as well as walking to actually become short of breath, which I couldn't do with my cane.
So you use a wheeled walker when you're out.
Yeah. And that it's a four-wheeled walker. And that actually was invented by a Swedish woman with polio. And she deliberately didn't patent it because she wanted it to be available for the world.
That reminds me, Jonas Salk did the same thing with the polio vaccine.
The vaccine, yeah.
Someone asked, can you describe a typical day in terms of what activities you do?
So I work. I do my work, of course, and I do also stay both physically and mentally active. Nowadays, I don't box as much as I used to because of the pandemic and other factors as well. But I do use a Nintendo Wii and box in my home. So I use the games on Nintendo Wii balance board. I try to do it every day. I don't always succeed, but I try to do it every day. And I find that both fun and well, it's both fun and a good thing to do. Sometimes I play with my 70-year-old as well.
Who's a better boxer?
Probably me, actually. He gets bored.
Hans van Gulick asks, Sarah, when you went to college, did you do it individually or in a class? And how did that go with learning with Parkinson?
I did attend the program. Actually, both times I did go to, when I started to be an engineer, I also did chemistry labs, which was a challenge. And but it went well. I did go in a class. It went well. I've never sort of had to adopt much. Of course, the writing has been a challenge with handwriting because of stiffness in my wrists. But other than that, I've been able to follow the curriculum all through, actually, both times.
And so another listener asks, what should care partners, what do you want care partners to know? What do you find most supportive to both? Do you feel that the role of care partners is adequately acknowledged by clinicians?
That is a good question. So I don't think my husband sees himself as my care partner. I think he sees me as my husband. And so, but of course, with progression, I expect things will change as the dynamics will probably change. And I think that it's increasingly acknowledged by clinicians, but of course, so it's going in the right direction. And of course, having been a care partner or a next of kin or informal caregiver in others, I mean, my husband he had a pretty severe case of almost sepsis a few years ago. So then the roles were sort of changed. And I know how much more energy it takes for the person who stands beside watching than to be the person with the disease themselves. Because you can always know yourself how you feel and what you want to do, but if you're standing next to them, there's so much more worry. So for me, it takes much more energy being the care partner to someone than to be sick myself.
Bob Miglaris says, I was diagnosed with atypical Parkinsonism about 8 months ago. I've asked my neurologist 2 things. His answers do not seem to make sense to me, and I'd like to get your thoughts. 1, I've asked what research studies I could get involved in. His response was that he couldn't enroll me until he identifies what kind of Parkinson's I have or atypical Parkinson's I have. 2, since there are many kinds of atypical Parkinson's disease, what can we do to identify mine? He says it doesn't matter because the treatment's the same.
Oh boy. My first thought would be for you to get a second opinion, Bob. Not because he might not, I'm sure he might be right, but your questions are valid, and I think if I were in your shoes, I would try to get a second opinion to find out this sort of what you can expect and see what someone else would say. Since 20 to 30% of people with Parkinson's turn out to have the wrong diagnosis, it's worth getting a second opinion, I think.
Irwin Malin asks, would you like to see patients take more responsibility for their own health as a basic foundation for health service provision?
I think that's a definite yes. And I like your added comment on financially as well. There is a tough balance to be found here, of course, because it's something you need to do. It's very empowering to be more active as a patient, but it also is not. There's a balance to be found between active and being expected to be active. But with a good clinical team, you can find that balance. I would definitely see that, both for their own health. But I've also been involved in a project in Sweden where we have explored what people want to do for the system and being involved on a systems level. And lots of people want to be more involved than they are helping the system change, than they are currently giving the opportunity to be.
Someone asks, how young are you?
I'll be 50 next year.
You look outstanding.
It's the Parkinson's. You don't get to
Bev Robato says, my Parkinson's symptoms started in my early teens, and I'm now 60. My father and his only brother didn't get symptoms until they were in their 80s.
Yeah. Hi, Bev. Nice to see you. And of course, it's very different, and it's not even certain that you have the right type, the same kind of Parkinson's, since there are so many factors involved in this. But it can actually also be just a bad coincidence.
Matt Eagle says, do you use music to help with your freezing at all?
I don't. Because my freezing is. That's another thing with my freezing. When it happens, my brain goes completely blank for a few seconds. So I don't think it will help. The only thing that can help is someone give external cues, like my husband or my 70-year-old or someone walking with me, sort of telling me to do things. Sometimes it helps to jump up and down on my right foot, and sometimes it helps to do other things. But it's very difficult for me to react to something that's passive, like music. So it's interesting.
One little pearl for those who do get freezing: sometimes when you get frozen, you can take a step back, take a step forward, and that can help people out.
So for me, jumping up and down actually works on the foot that's stuck.
Carol Vollmer wants to learn more about your daily routine. Your exercise. Do you take any supplements or vitamins or anything you do on nutrition?
I actually don't at this point. I've tried a lot of things, but I think I take enough pills as it is. I try to eat, of course, a healthy diet, regular food, and try to a lot less meat than I used to, mostly for environmental reasons, but just eating good healthy meals and trying to avoid too many bad things, I think, is a good thing.
And some people know that a Mediterranean diet has been shown suggested to slow the rate of progression in Parkinson's for those who have the disease. It may even prevent people from developing the disease.
Yeah. There have been suggestions, though, that it can be the Mediterranean life in itself. That's the social atmosphere as well, as an addition to that. So I think it's important to see the whole context.
Susan Buff asks a different question. How do you think the design of clinical trials could be improved? What research is involved in trial design? So
there's another link we can send out if it's been posted yet, because I'm also involved in the Quantified Self community, where self-trackers all over the world, not Parkinson specific at all, but we had a conversation a few weeks ago, I think it's going to be posted soon, about personal science and chronic disease and basic self-tracking, how you can use it. And so I think clinical trials are good for the things it was originally designed to do, to evaluate new treatments. But it's been evolved to be used for more than it was intended to do, and it's more complicated to do these days because it's more difficult to separate effects. So I do agree with you, Susan. I think you're implying that it needs to change, but I can't give a sort of short answer, brief answer here. But the advice I would give would be for researchers to always involve the people that the trial is intended to help before the trial is even designed, to have their input all through the way.
So I'll give a brief shout out to Sara. She was very kind and helped us plan a randomized control trial of telemedicine about 7 years ago. I don't know if Sara,
right.
She even did a video with us 7 years ago to help us do a clinical trial that showed that telemedicine was feasible for people to receive it in their homes, save patients and caregivers a lot of time and money, and generated comparable clinical outcomes to regular care in the clinic. Matt asks, how disruptive is the emotional side of Parkinson's disease, crying, overthinking, pseudobulbar effects, and the like?
I mean, of course, it's a big thing. I don't think I have as much. Well, of course, it varies. I actually take a small dose of a tricyclic antidepressant for helping me sleep. which I think also has a positive effect on my mood overall. Of course, the overthinking, the emotional parts, of course, they are significant for me as well. But I think I've learned to live with it for now, at least. It's hard, but it's not it's not the end of the world, especially not in these times of pandemic, right? There are always people having it tougher than you, I think.
Before we close with a last question for Sara, I want to remind people, hopefully they can see that you can purchase our book, Ending Parkinson's Disease, on Amazon. It's still priced, I think, at a competitive price below $18. And the more, all the authors are donating all of our proceeds from the book to efforts to help end Parkinson's disease. The more people buy the book and read the book, the sooner we can get around to preventing people from ever getting the disease in the first place. If you've read the book, we'd love you to put a ratings on Amazon. It doesn't matter where you got the book or how you got the book. You can just click on ratings and you can just write a customer review right here. And it prompts you to give you your rating. Simply add a headline, write your review, I like the book, and click submit. And that will help us get the word out about ending Parkinson's disease. And as we've said before, if anyone would like a copy of the book and can't afford it, we'll send you one for free. Just drop us an email at info@endingpd.org and we'd be delighted to send you one. If you have another question for Sara, my guess is Sara's pretty accessible. If you send us a question at info@endingpd.org, we can send it your way. Is that all right, Sara?
Of course, yeah. And I'm looking forward to the next book of in your series, and hope that it will. Because this book is great. You've done a great job collating a lot of important information about Parkinson's. But the advice is mainly targeted towards not getting Parkinson's in the first place, which is too late for all of us on this call, right? So yes. I would love to see the next book be taking the step towards how to actually work with people with Parkinson's and how to end Parkinson's for us as well.
Yes, and so we have a couple of chapters on care and treatment where we put a heavy emphasis on trying to prevent people from ever getting the disease. And Michael Oaken's already working on that book for you on the update of his 10 secrets. And I'll tell you, if people, we'll even send, if someone really wants a copy, we'll send you a bundle. If you can't afford this book, you send us an email at info@endingpd.org. We'll send you this book and Michael Oaken's 10 Secrets book as a bonus for people that can't afford it. We'd be happy to send you the book. We want the message to get out regardless of people's ability to pay.
That's excellent. Thank you. You're doing a great thing.
Our Voices of Parkinson series continues Wednesday, July 22nd, when we're going to hear from another person who developed Parkinson's disease at a young age, Brian Grant, a former NBA basketball star. And then Katrina Call from the Brian Grant Foundation will be joining us to take your questions. Just as his NBA career was ending, Brian was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, and he founded the Brian Grant Foundation, which Katrina now directs. So Sara, in conclusion, you've had Parkinson's disease, one of the few people who've had Parkinson's disease for most of your life, almost all your life. What will it take to end Parkinson's disease?
Yeah, so I call myself an optimistic realist with Parkinson's disease. So optimistically, I expect research and my own work to be able to keep up with the progression of my Parkinson's. But realistically, I don't think the cure will come in my lifetime. So I'm just trying to do the best I can to make every day be as good as I can with what I have today. So, and for me, ending Parkinson's would mean not having to be afraid of having Parkinson's. That is, being able to trust the system that you can get the help you can through telemedicine and other facilities.
Not being afraid to have Parkinson's if you have it. The book provides you some suggestions on what you can do to improve your life if you do have the disease, including a chapter on the new treatments that are in development for Parkinson's disease. And the first response to any pandemic, whether it's COVID or Parkinson's disease, is to stop people from getting the disease. And so this book spends a lot of time telling us all how we can prevent getting the disease, if not for ourselves, but for our loved ones. So we look forward to people's comments and thoughts on the book. Sara, thank you very much. You've been a champion par excellence. I don't know anyone who's quite like you. You look better than any other 50-year-olds that I know. And thank you for not only being an advocate for people with the disease, but for all your research contributions and being so accessible on so many fronts. Anytime there's something in need, Sara's name comes up among the Parkinson researcher. Who's that person in Sweden that we should reach out to? So thank you very much, Sara.
Thank you, Ray, for being the open person you are and for everything you do for people with Parkinson's disease.
Thank you all for joining us on this Voices of Parkinson series. We look forward to seeing you again Wednesday, July 22nd at 1 p.m. Eastern. If you have additional thoughts or suggestions or ideas, just email us at info@endingtd.org. We need a whole community of individuals with and without the disease to help bring about the end of this disease for everyone.